Alright then, seeing my comments on my previous videos, you guys really wanted an RTX 3070 buying guide, so an RTX 3070 buying guide you get. And this time around, I'm actually comparing 38 different models to give you guys a better idea of which models are worth your money, not just the ones that are already reviewed. This time, I'm also not going to be going into too much detail into each of the cards because then this video will be about 1 hour long. So I might put that as a second part if there's a lot of interest. So let's get right into it. Like the RTX 3090 video, I'm going to show the graphs and comparison between all the cards first, then rank them from first to last. Now to explain how I compare the different cards, I always emphasize on the power limits as being the important part of the card specifications. Because the new GPUs these days can boost their clock speeds as high as they can go, as long as there's enough power and temperature headroom, which makes the boost clock specifications almost useless since most cards will just clock about 1800 to 2000 MHz. And the defining factors that actually affect performance these days is the power limit and cooler performance. And because most of the coolers can keep the GPUs at a reasonable temperature, the really most impactful parameter on the performance is the power limit, which Nvidia also intentionally set low on their reference design specifications to increase its efficiency. Now on the custom cards, the manufacturers usually increase it to get more performance out of the card because there's gonna be less clock speed throttling, but in return you also get less efficiency. But this efficiency loss shouldn't really be a big deal. Conveniently, the power limits are also easily checked for any cards by just checking their BIOS files, which are available on either the manufacturer's website or on TechPowerUp's GPU BIOS database for almost every model. So that's why I'm using this as a basis for comparison in this video. Of course, the coolers are also an important part of the card as that has a direct impact on performance, where a better cooler will run cooler and therefore boost higher, as well as being able to run more quietly. With that said, let's start with the power limits. It's a lot of data for 38 cards, so let's break this down into groups. This is so that we can have a rough idea of the performance, as the cards with similar power limits will have similar performance, naturally. We can focus on the stock power limit first for default operation, where you can see there are a lot of cards with a 220 watt power limit, which is exactly like Nvidia's specification on the RTX 3070 Founders Edition and reference specification. These cards will perform roughly the same as the Founders Edition card in terms of performance, so you can look at the review for that to have a rough idea of the performance of these cards. Then we have the 240 watt class cards. These will be similar in performance again, so the 240 watt class cards that have been reviewed, like the MSI Gaming X Trio and Asus TUF Gaming OC, will be a good reference for these cards' performance. One standout is the 250 watt Palit Game Rock, which I haven't seen being reviewed by anyone, and no other cards have a 250 watt power limit. But you can guess it's slightly higher than the likes of the MSI Gaming X Trio and TUF Gaming OC, as it has a beefier cooler as well as a slightly higher power limit, but it's not gonna be that big of a difference. Then on the higher end, we can see that the GPUs that are most likely to have a higher price premium due to their higher quality components with the 270 watt and 280 watt power limits as well. These cards will have the highest default performance as these power limits are high enough to sustain maximum boost speeds indefinitely. So for example, the EVGA FTW3 series, which has been reviewed, can be used as reference for the cards in this performance class. If you don't plan to overclock them, then that's all that matters is the power limits on the default settings. Now if you're going to overclock them, then the max power limits of the cards will be just as important, if not more. It will allow a higher sustained clock speed the higher the power limits are. There are no exceptions to this rule, as the power limit is the biggest limitations on these new GPUs. Of course, you might get a golden sample silicon that clocks to the moon with very little power, but at a given silicon quality, the higher power limit, the higher sustained clock speeds will be. Here you can see that the worst cards are the MSI Ventus series, which allows a 0 power limit increase after their already very low stock power limit. So if you are planning on overclocking, I would suggest to avoid those, and even then, if you don't overclock, it really doesn't give a good impression because it seems like MSI cheaped out on the components and aren't confident in their allowing a higher power limit on their cards, which really doesn't instill confidence in the quality of the cards. Then you can also see the GPUs with a slight allowance on the power limit at 240 watts, which is the same as the Founders Edition cards. These cards can have a small performance benefit from the extra 20 watts, but again these cards are not made for the serious overclockers. This is the same situation with 250 watt cards again, which is surprising to see the MSI Gaming X Trio in this category, as it has dual 8 pins for power input which should easily handle over 300 watts. But as you'll see later, it might be because they cheaped out on the PCB components and are basically afraid to let a higher power limit for reliability reasons. Therefore, this particular card is not suitable for serious overclockers, no matter how impressive the cooler seems like. Then there are the cards in the 260 watt class, and this is the point where the power limit increase are only starting to approach what is required to have the RTX 3070 GPU boost to the maximum clock speeds without throttling down. These cards will start to have a meaningfully higher overclocking headroom than the Founders Edition card. Then we have the 270 and 280 watt power limit card, which as we saw in the EVGA FTW3 review, is enough power limit headroom for the GPU to sustain maximum boost speeds indefinitely in most workloads, which because of the lock voltage will have just enough power limit headroom for any overclocking without really any power limit throttling for most use cases. It is also quite interesting to note that the Gigabyte Gaming OC here has zero power limit increase, and instead Gigabyte just set the default power limit at 270 watts for higher out-of-the-box performance, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Then we have the 290 watt colorful advanced OC card, which should have an even greater sustained performance, just before the 300 watt plus power limit cards. These 300 watt plus cards will be the ones with the most overclocking headroom and what serious overclockers should look into getting. One thing to note is the MSI Supreme X card is so new that I can't find its BIOS, so I'm assuming that it's over 300 watts after seeing its 280 watt default specification. But I am not 100% sure on this one, so if you have an MSI Supreme X, then maybe you can save the BIOS and show it to me so that we can verify this for sure. But I'm pretty certain it's gonna be over 300 watts because the MSI Supreme X is their flagship model. But for sure, the Gigabyte Aorus Master, EVGA FTW3, Palit Jetstream OC, and Palit Gainward OC, and the Asus Strix cards are the ones to get if you plan on pushing the 3070 GPU to its limits, and even more so if you do some voltage mods to increase the voltage and therefore the power consumption. What's interesting to see here is the difference between the OC and non-OC models of the GPUs, where the OC models usually have an appreciably higher power limit just to account for their overclock frequencies. And this backs my point that power limits affect performance more than the clock speeds, because otherwise they wouldn't change the power limits at all. And the only reason they did this is because if they put the OC model with the same power limit as the non-OC model, I'm betting you that they're gonna perform exactly the same. So if you're looking for a higher default performance or even higher overclocking performance, I would look for the OC models of the different graphics card models. Now related to the power limit graphs is the VRM Current Capability, which won't directly affect performance, but it gives you an idea of how much corner cutting has been done on that card, as a more powerful VRM is more expensive to produce. It is also important for any serious overclockers who are looking to remove the power limits with shunt mods and voltage mods, where a higher VRM current capability can sustain higher overclocks and voltages. Here we can immediately see why the MSI cards have the lowest power limits. The MSI Gaming X Trio, which is marketed as a high-end card of sorts, has for some reason the lowest VRM current capability courtesy of cheaper 45 amp power stages from onsemi on a reference 9-phase VRM setup, where usually they use a 50 amp alpha and omega power stage setup. I'm a bit disgusted by this because what MSI is basically saying is that you can have a privilege to pay extra for their custom card only to have an inferior VRM, especially when they're marketing it on their website as having a robust PCB design. This is really not acceptable to me, even if it doesn't actually directly affect performance. This is just not great to see MSI cutting corners on their higher end Gaming X Trio card. Now on the MSI Ventus cards, I don't have PCB photos of those yet, but I can only assume that they can't be better than the Gaming X Trio as a lower end model, but I also do not know if they made it worse than the Gaming X Trio. But for the benefit of the doubt, I'm just putting them as the same, although seeing the power limits, it might be even worse, which is not great to think about. I would personally avoid the MSI cards just because of their corner cutting in the PCB components here, because it doesn't sit right with me to spend extra on the Gaming X Trio and have the worst VRM setup than all the other cards. Okay, well, enough rant about the MSI cards. Moving on, we have the 450 amp class VRM cards, which are based on the reference design Alpha and Omega 50 amp power stages with 9 phases. These cards are the same as the Nvidia Founders Editions card in terms of current capability, so it's not great, but it's not terrible either, and it definitely meets Nvidia's spec. Then the 500 amp class cards are also based on the reference design PCB and power stages, but with an extra phase. I would say that these cards are the ones the manufacturers decided they needed to make better than the reference specification. Lastly, we have the 600 amp class cards, although the Gigabyte Aorus Master and Supreme X are again speculated as I couldn't find the PCB photos of them as they're such new models. But they are speculated with reason as they are the flagship models, and it's almost impossible for them to have the same or worse than their lower end models VRMs. These cards will be suitable for shunt mods and voltage mods for extreme overclocking, as the cards from this class of VRM are basically the ones with no corners cut designed for the PCBs and should easily handle shunt mods and volt mods to overclock an RTX 3070 GPU. Although the most amazing one is the Asus Strix with an impressive 720 amp VRM current capability, which goes above and beyond no corners cut to basically overkill territory. This is also shown in the Asus Strix having the highest maximum power limit than all the other cards at 350 watts, which is the same as an RTX 3090 power limit, which is absolutely ridiculous for an RTX 3070, but if you're looking for overclocking, this is definitely the one to get. So for the serious overclockers, I will suggest you guys spend your time hitting F5 trying to buy the Asus Strix more than any of the other cards. And now for the temperature results, I can only gather data together for the ones that are reviewed by trusted reviewers that reviewed the same cards, so that I can correct the results and compile them together. These are again results from Guru 3D, Tech Power Up, and Hexus.net, whom I respect and trust what they do. What I did was pick one review result, the Guru 3D set in this case, and correct Tech Power Up's and Hexus results using the Nvidia's Founders Edition results, which they all reviewed. And this is because this is the most consistent card because of the low power limit, which will be hit in all the different workloads that they use to test the temperatures, resulting in consistent heat output between all the samples, and a copper baseplate cooler that provides more consistent contact between the samples as well, which means that the temperatures are less variable. I didn't use the MSI Gaming X Trio even though they all reviewed that because their results are kinda all over the place thanks to their inferior direct contact heat pipe design, which causes inconsistent performance between different samples, or the Palit Jetstream, which has a high power limit resulting in different heat outputs between samples being a high possibility. So in the end, I calculated the Tech Power Up review is about 1 degree Celsius higher and 6 dBA quieter than Guru 3D's, and Hexus review is about 2 degrees Celsius higher and 1 dBA noisier. So if we correct the results to Guru 3D and cross compare the results, I think this will be fairly accurate for anyone looking to buy the cards to be able to confidently use to compare each other. So with that adjustment in place, I picked the best performing results to give the cards the best showing. Here we can see that the Gaming X Trio, the Tough Gaming OC, perform similarly with them having the same power limits as well. Then the EVGA cooler seems to be slightly behind in performance, but keep in mind that it's dissipating 270 watts, which is 30 watts more than the other two cards. So it's not actually behind those cards, but I would say actually better than those cards, seeing how it dissipates more heat. Then the Gigabyte Gaming OC is definitely behind all of the first three after showing hotter and noisier performance with the same 270 watt power limit as the EVGA, and also the same with the Palit Jetstream cooler being even worse as it's only a dual fan design dissipating 270 watts of heat, but this might be good for a more compact case where you can't fit a triple fan cooler. Bringing up the rear then is the 220 watt Zotac Twin Edge OC, which only manages to be cooler than the Founders Edition by cranking up the fans. So in reality, their cooler's actual performance is probably roughly the same. Now for the coolers, there's obviously no specification or set value we can see to compare the performance on cards that aren't reviewed yet. So for this comparison, I classed them into 6 categories, with C class being the Founders Edition's cooler's performance, B class being the typical triple fan dual slot cooler performance, as well as dual fan but triple slot cooler performance, B plus class for the triple slot triple fan designs, as well as the really wide and triple slot dual fan designs, and A class for the triple slot triple fan designs, which has a large and wide cooler as well, and lastly A plus for the top tier triple fan designs like on the Asus Strix and Palit Game Rock, for example. I deduced these rankings based on the known temperatures for the cards that are reviewed and from knowing how the same cooler performs on the 3080 or 3090 models, which are already reviewed for some cards like the Palit Gaming Pro and Game Rock, as well as the MSI Supreme X. For the non-reviewed cards, some have the same cooler design like the Palit Gaming Pro with the PNY Epic X Gainward Phoenix, sharing the same cooler with different looks. Then the cards with no info, I just deduced the possible performance based on size and design. But do take my ratings here with a grain of salt, since these are just my observations, not a set value, although it should give a rough idea of their performance. So for the highest performing coolers, I will start with the A+ class, where the Asus Strix, EVGA FTW3 series, MSI Supreme X, and both Palit Game Rock cards sit. These cards are the one that have the massive motherboard bending triple slot triple fan coolers that are a direct hand-me-down from their RTX 3080 and 3090 versions. Suffice to say, these will have no problems cooling even the most heavily overclocked RTX 3070s. Next we have the A-class coolers, and these cards are the Gigabyte Aorus Master, Asus TUF Gaming OC, and MSI Gaming X Trio cards, where we see wide triple fan coolers that sit just below 3 slots thick. These coolers are basically as good as it can get without going overkill, and should again have no problems cooling highly overclocked RTX 3070 GPUs while also staying silent during normal operation. Then for the B+ class coolers, we have the cards that have a narrow triple fan cooler that's still just under 3 slots thick, which will perform similarly, such as the Colorful Advanced OC, Colorful Ultra OCV, Gigabyte Gaming OC, Gigabyte Vision OC, Galax Gamer OC, Galax or KFA2 SG series, Gainward Chasing the Wind, Inno3D iChill X3, Maxon iCraft OC, Zotac X Gaming OC, and notably the Palit Gaming Pro series, Gainward Phoenix, and PNY Revel Epic X, which share the same cooler and PCB design with each other, just with slightly different shroud designs, which can be seen from the same fans being used in all the cards. Then there's also the only dual fan card, the Palit Jetstream series with an extra thick and wide dual fan cooler. Now these B+ coolers will run cooler temperatures than the Founders Edition card, but noise levels will probably be similar or slightly higher with the higher wattage cards. Right under these we have the B class coolers. These include the narrow dual slot triple fan cooler designs such as the EVGA XC3 series, Gigabyte Eagle series, and MSI Ventus 3X series, so this will be ideal for small form factor cases that can't take super thick triple slot cards. Here we can also see the Asus KO-OC, Asus Dual series, and PNY Uprising with triple slot dual fan coolers. The B class coolers will probably be only slightly cooler and quieter than the Founders Edition, and there are no high wattage cards in this class. Lastly, we have the C class coolers, which should perform identically to the Founders Edition card, which isn't horrible or unusable, but just kinda mediocre. They're not anything special or great either. They will be on cards like the Zotac Twin Edge series and MSI Ventus 2X series, which will have the lowest MSRPs. So now it's time to rank the cards. Since there are too many cards and many are similar, I will put them into tiers this time around to make it easier to understand and give options if you can't find a model in stock but want something similar in performance and quality. Keep in mind I evaluate this based on all the metrics, so if they fall short on one, they will go down a tier, and if they excel in one, it helps bring it up a tier as well. So starting with an honorable mention in first place, I'll put the Asus Strix on top for being the no corners cut overkill design. It has the biggest cooler meant for the RTX 3080 and 3090 and the highest power limits both default and maxed out, complementing its strongest VRM Current Capability. Then I would put the Palit Game Rock OC, EVGA FTW3, MSI Supreme X, and Gigabyte Aorus Master in the highest class of cards as well. You can't go wrong with either of them if you demand maximum performance and great overclocking from a high power limit. Then for the high performance and basically as good as it gets without going overkill and expensive options, I would pick the Asus TUF Gaming OC, Palit Game Rock, Gigabyte Gaming OC, Gigabyte Vision OC, and Palit Jetstream OC. For the still high performance but not quite the best ones, I would recommend the MSI Gaming X Trio, only if you really don't care about overclocking it. Personally, I wouldn't get any MSI card just because you're paying more for a worse VRM, which just doesn't sit well with me even though it might not affect the performance directly. Colorful Advanced OC, Maxon iCraft OC, Palit Jetstream, Palit Gaming Pro OC, and Asus KO OC. Then these are the cheaper but still high performance options that should cost less than the previous tier, but will have absolutely no problems performing just as well and better than the Founders Edition still. There's the colorful Ultra OCV, Galax Gamer OC, Inno3D iChill X3, EVGA XC3, Gigabyte Eagle OC, Palit Gaming Pro, Gainward Phoenix, PNY Revel Epic X, and Asus Dual OC. Then there are the cards that I would class in the same tier as the Founders Edition's card, which are the Galax and KFA2 SG, Gainward Chasing the Wind, Colorful Battle Axe, Zotac X Gaming OC, Gigabyte Eagle, Asus Dual, PNY Uprising, Nvidia Founders Edition, obviously, Zotac Twin Edge OC, and Zotac Twin Edge. Still great cards that should perform just as well as the Founders Edition, and with the Galax and KF2, Gainward, Colorful, Zotac, and Gigabyte, despite large coolers being put here because they come with the same power limits as the Founders Edition, which really limits their performance. Lastly, there are the MSI Ventus series, which I personally wouldn't recommend from seeing how MSI didn't allow any power limit adjustment, which says to me that even they aren't confident in their card's cooling and VRM capability, which means they probably aren't the highest quality of cards. These are the cards you buy when you can't find the others in stock and just absolutely need a GPU right now for work or something. Otherwise, I would avoid them for literally any other competing options. And my personal pick would be the Asus TUF Gaming OC, which brings the balance of great cooling performance, great VRM, and great power limit in the BIOS, which is a great option if you're looking for an RTX 3070 that'll be a good all-rounder that won't cost you an arm and a leg like the A+ tier cards. So if you want a good RTX 3070, I would just get the RTX 3070 TUF Gaming OC. But yeah, for the rest, you can just look at the tier list that I made just now and just compare which ones you like the most in the tier, then they should perform pretty much similarly. Well, that's my RTX 3070 buying guide on which models you should buy and which models you should avoid. Really, the only cards I'd avoid are the MSI Ventus series, which are underwhelming in every way. At least the Gaming X Trio has a good cooler to compensate for its crappy VRM. The rest you shouldn't have any issues with, well, except for the fact that you probably can't find these in stock for now, so a lot of you guys are probably just going to get any RTX 3070 you can find in stock anyways. But if you're watching this in the future when the stock levels are normal, then congratulations, now you can pick an RTX 3070 that suits you. Otherwise, that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and if you liked it, then please click like on the like button as it helps me out a lot. And maybe subscribe to my channel for more buying guides like this or reviews and other PC hardware videos. Thanks for watching.